There she is, there she is, that's what keeps me up at night. Oh gee whiz, that's why I can't eat a bite. Those flaming eyes, that flaming youth. Oh mister, oh sister, tell me the truth. Now ain't she sweet, see her coming down the street. I ask you confidentially.
As we begin this talk about women's suffrage, let's go ahead and start with a reminder about what the word suffrage means. Suffrage is the right to vote in a political election, and the women's suffrage movement was all about women's rights at that time. They were fighting for their right to vote. You can see here there's a picture of a group of women, and they're marching for those rights. Now, more than just the right to vote, the women's suffrage movement was about women having the right to lead their lives without the social issues that they had been living with for so long. They had no rights outside of their husbands or fathers, and that meant that they couldn't get a college education, they couldn't own property, they had no rights to sign contracts, own or operate a business, and it was thought that if a woman strayed outside of their home, then they were not going to be able to handle it. Their place was in the home, and they just were not smart enough to handle much of anything else. Now, remember at this time that the abolitionist movement was going on, and so slavery and equal rights were on everyone's mind. The women's suffrage movement is something that actually had started a long time ago. It started back when our country came into being after the Revolutionary War. Even Abigail Adams thought that women should have rights and a say in government. She reminded her husband, the president, to remember the ladies as they made government decisions. The women's suffrage movement was actually 72 years long before they were granted the right to vote in 1920. Now, not all women agreed that women should have the right to vote, and as you can see here in this picture, they're torturing women in prison. Some of them were just perfectly happy with staying in the social position that they were in, and so as women stood up for their rights, they were sometimes placed in mental institutions called insane asylums, or even placed in jail, and they were mistreated and given very barbaric treatments to try to cure them of their crazy ideas. And some of those things were seen here in this advertisement to vote against the government. Now, one of the main ways that women made their opinion known was by picketing. Picketing meant that they made signs that said they were wanted, or what they wanted the government or other people to know about, and we talked about this in class, and you made a picketing sign in class. They would then hold these signs up and march or stand around in public places until they were noticed. They might stand in front of the White House. They might stand in front of the local voting place, the mayor's house, the town square, or even outside of the courthouse. If someone called the police, they would be taken to jail, and they knew that. Sometimes they organized parades where hundreds of women with signs and banners would just march down the street, and it would cause traffic to stop and people to come and see what was going on. There were three main women that were part of the suffrage movement. The first one we want to review is Susan B. Anthony, and you can think of her as a main person. She was sort of the face of the women's suffrage movement. She was an advocate, and that's the word you need to associate with Susan B. Anthony, an advocate for women's rights. She felt strongly that women should have the right to vote, and one of the things that she said was, "No man is good enough to govern any woman without her consent." She worked with a lot of other women to get the word out that they would not rest until they were given the right to vote. Now, she decided to be rebellious and vote in the election of 1872, even though she knew the law said that she couldn't. She ended up getting arrested and getting fined $100. Now, she was a school teacher, and she only made $2.50 an hour. So you can do the math and decide how extreme that $100 fee was for this time. The next person we want to talk about is Isabel Sojourner Truth, and sorry the name is cut off the bottom of the slide there. Isabel Sojourner Truth, her original name, for those of you that ask, was Isabel Baumfree. She gave herself the name Sojourner Truth in 1843. Now, Isabel was a former slave, and her thing was that she said, I didn't run away because I felt that it was wrong, so I walked away because I felt I was all right with that. So she just walked away from slavery. She worked to secure freedom and equality for all people with a special interest in the women's rights movement. She gave this famous speech that was titled, Ain't I a Woman?, where she was known to have made a great impression on a lot of people. She also aided black troops during and after the Civil War as she continued to fight for equality and women's rights. Now, a third woman is Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and she was considered a leader in the movement. So remember the word leader as you think about Elizabeth Cady Stanton. She was considered a driving force in the women's movement and was part of the movement from the beginning. She saw many other people join this cause, including Susan B. Anthony. So Elizabeth Cady Stanton was actually part of this before Susan B. Anthony. And Elizabeth Cady Stanton was a mother, and she really valued that job, and so she refused to travel around and leave her family to speak at conventions far away from her house. So because of this, she would write speeches that were delivered by other women in her place. And she remained a part of the women's movement until the end of her life in 1902. She didn't live long enough to see women gain the right to vote, but women today definitely should remember the name Elizabeth Cady Stanton as they think about women's rights. Now, just to recap, Susan B. Anthony was an advocate for gaining rights for women and equality for all. Elizabeth Sojourner Truth was the former slave who supported women's rights and equality. She was an important player in this as well. And finally, Elizabeth Cady Stanton was a leader in the women's suffrage movement. Now here's some quotes of the time so that you can kind of see what people were saying as they fought for their rights. They would say, all men and women are created equal. And that sounds a lot like another government document that we've heard. Organize, agitate, educate must be our war cry. No self-respecting woman should wish or work for the success of a party that ignores her sex. We are ready to work beside you, fight beside you, and die beside you. Let us vote beside you. Now, I know many of you enjoyed the music video that we watched when we were studying the Declaration of Independence, and I found this one on women's suffrage by the same company and included it here, so I hope you enjoy it. So here is the women's suffrage video by, it's a spoof done to the song by Lady Gaga, Bad Romance.
Suffrage. Votes whoa, won't stop. Ooh la la, till we have suffrage. It's gotten ugly, they passed the 15. Still women have no right, no guarantee to liberty. Child health, wealth, and property. Hey. We'll raise our banner across this land. 'Cause franchise isn't just the right of a man. You love us so. Yeah, to love us so. You know we don't want to take freedoms from you. Just want our rights and nothing less. We cry for freedom, love, hear our voice, and see we're equal to all men. From this most perfect union. criminal, a right that is mine. I want the vote. Vote, 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 I want to vote. Well, I think you're psycho, I think that it's sick. I'm queen of my home, raise my babies, that's it. Don't need to vote.
No, no, she don't want to vote.
The rights of citizens shall not be denied or abridged by the United States on account of sex.
We cry for freedom, oh, hear our voice and see we're equal to all men. We love all people, not just male citizens, from this most perfect union. Caught in a bad romance. Caught in a bad romance. Votes, whoa, won't stop, ooh la la, till we have suffrage.
March, march, be courageous, fighting for our rights we may just start. Greatness for the ages, freedom, it is contagious. March, march, be courageous, fighting for our rights we may just start. Greatness for the ages, remember the ladies.
Not to be above, but equal to all men. We only ask to be part of this union. Comme dit le français, c'est démocratie. Permettez-moi participer. I'm a citizen of this nation. And American, I want suffrage and independence. We cry for freedom, oh, hear our voice and see we're equal to all men. We the whole people, not just male citizens, from this most perfect union. I wanna wear pants. Caught in a bad romance. I want my suffrage and independence. Caught in a bad romance. Votes, whoa, won't stop, ooh la la, now we have suffrage.
So just remember that the women's suffrage movement didn't end until 1920 when the 19th Amendment was passed, that it was a long, hard fight, and the world today is a different place because of these women and the determination to have those rights. Now that video was a little bit goofy and a little weird, but this was a very serious time in our nation's history and a long and serious time. Now remember to bring your homework to school tomorrow, and I will see you then. Have a wonderful rest of your evening.